to Anne's neck. As previously stated from the autopsy reports, she lived approximately 2 more hours, having endured 6 stab wounds to her chest, side, and back. These wounds punctured her heart, lungs, and other organs. She also had 4 stab wounds to her neck and was so violently raped that her vagina was severely lacerated. Taylor stated he watched her struggle to breathe as she lay bleeding in the trunk of the stolen car. Any reasonable and prudent individual would consider the pain and terror she endured as nothing less than horrific. Taylor's was not the case of a wrongly accused prisoner on death row based on circumstantial evidence. From the time of his arrest, Taylor pleaded guilty to his crimes, and there was also witness testimony. But most significant was the fact that critical DNA evidence obtained from the victim and her attackers proved beyond any doubt that both Taylor and his accomplice, Roderick Nunley, had abducted, violently raped, and brutally murdered 15-year-old Anne Marie Harrison. The victim's head and pubic hairs were at the scene of the rape, which occurred in the basement of the house belonging to Nunley's mother. In addition, blood typing and DNA testing of semen found in the victim's genitals and on her clothing confirmed that it came from Taylor. There was also physical evidence that proved that Nunley also took part in the attacks. However, he admitted that the drugs he'd been using on the previous night's escapade rendered him incapable of completing the sexual assault that Taylor goaded him on to do. Public perception is that these individuals are locked away in small single cells as they repent for their misdeeds. This image was clearly not the case, as these killers had access to socialize with other prisoners, participate in activities, and even obtain contraband. There was a story in the local press about how Taylor found religion in prison and visited hospice patients in the prison hospital. It was another, young man gone wrong story of repentance, but Taylor came from a good, loving family. Witnesses learned from the prison staff that both Nunley and Taylor had access to sex and drugs, so nothing changed in their lives from a lifestyle standpoint, except that they were now restricted to a smaller footprint than the unsuspecting streets of Kansas City. Their conduct remained the same, only their addresses had changed. However, the lives of the families that live on those unsuspecting streets have been changed forever, as the sense of being safe in your own front yard was shattered. There is no green mile where repentant prisoners linger and bond with their jailers. No prayerful activist nun reaches to touch the glass as the condemned man is raised on the gurney in a crucifixion-like manner to utter a poignant apology. Such are the romanticized adaptations of Hollywood screenwriters. No, what there was instead was a surreal sense of peace and silence. The drugs administered to the individual are the same used for physician-assisted suicide, legal in the Netherlands and Washington state. It is reasonable to believe that no one seeking to die from unbearable pain through this method of suicide would elect a technique that is cruel and unusual. It is problematic as a method of execution, primarily because laws prevent physicians from administering the drugs required for the process. In Taylor's case, guards escorted witnesses into a dark room where they sat on folding chairs, facing a window with drawn curtains. There were 2 sets of curtains, one on each side of the glass. Not knowing what to expect, the group sat there for 15 minutes, and at precisely 1 minute after midnight, prison staff opened the curtains. Seated facing the prisoner's right side, the observers were approximately 10 feet away from him. There was another set of windows on the opposite side of the room where he lay, face up and covered with a crisp white sheet just below his neck. He turned his head to the left and appeared to be saying something to the witnesses from his family, seated on the other side of that glass section. However, No one outside the glass could hear him because of the room's design. He turned his head back toward the ceiling, looked to the left once more, and then back at the ceiling as he closed his eyes. He never moved again. At roughly 7 minutes after midnight, the curtains closed. Witnesses sat and waited silently in the dimly lighted room, listening as the prison director spoke softly on his headset at the back of the room. He softly repeated to his contact, "Time of death, 12 minutes after midnight." The curtains were reopened briefly, and then were closed once again. The door to the observation room was opened as a prison guard simply said, "Watch your step," escorting his charges back to the holding room so that they could sign the logbook and the death warrant. There was nothing more to say. It was like the words to an old Peggy Lee song. Is that all there is? Is that all there is to an execution? No one wanted to see anyone suffer, and Taylor got much better than he deserved. He died as dignified a death as one could hope for, in clean surroundings, with his loved ones there to bid a final adieu. Conversely, Ann Harrison suffered. She was terrified, tortured, raped, and stabbed. She begged for her family and cried for her mother. Finally, she was tossed into the trunk of a stolen car and discarded like an old rag doll. Society cannot lose sight of Anne's suffering, nor lose sight of the torture that her parents have endured over the last 25 years, as appeal after appeal and execution date after execution date has come and gone. Ann Harrison did not receive justice with the death of Michael Taylor, nor would justice be served when Roderick Nunley was executed. These actions were reckoning, settling debts owed to society, the family, and Anne. Mr. Taylor received payback as well, and payback is hell. Chapter 22. In 2014, the Missouri Department of Corrections, the parents of Ann Harrison, and 2 witnesses scheduled to attend Roderick Nunley's execution were subpoenaed to Missouri Circuit Court in Jefferson City when the American Civil Liberties Union of Missouri filed an action under the Missouri Sunshine Law. The intent was to overturn the confidentiality of how executions are conducted, relative to the privacy of witnesses at the execution who vouch for its narrative that those killed by the state do not suffer. The ACLU called into question how the state of Missouri selected its witnesses. It was an opportunity for the ACLU to grandstand about the death penalty. As the Harrisons had every right to attend, 2 of the witnesses were there on behalf of the Harrisons, and of course, Department of Corrections witnesses went without saying. The media representatives who attended as witnesses were not named in this action, nor were the offenders' family witnesses. Who better to share any irregularities in the execution process of offenders than members of the offender's family? It quickly appeared that this was most likely a ploy, with the actual intent to get personal information that the ACLU could share publicly to pressure witnesses not to attend. A self-proclaimed community activist from the ACLU was one plaintiff. He stated under oath that he wasn't sure what he wanted to do with the information, but stated he might seek out potential witnesses to discuss the realities of the death penalty with those individuals. His evasiveness regarding what he was planning to do with the information was clear that he was walking the vainest razor's edge not to be accused of potential witness intimidation. Witnesses for Anne. He could not clearly articulate the ACLU's intention for accessing this information, why the media representative's personal data was not in question, how the information would be used, or the extent of its use. When prompted, he said having the home and work addresses were necessary to contact witnesses. He admitted that showing up at a witness's home or place of employment was not out of the question. The dangers posed to witnesses were limitless. It would only take one phone call from the offender to wreak havoc, threats, and actions not out of the realm of possibility. What boggled the mind was that this was an attempt also to gather personal information regarding prison employees who might witness the executions. Making this information readily available put guards in an untenable position, as any inmate who held a grudge against a guard who happened to be a witness would now potentially be able to cause harm to them outside the prison walls. The following are part of the correspondence sent regarding the action taken relative to the disclosure of personal information by the potential witnesses. Document 1. May 2, 2014. Custodian of Records, Missouri Department of Corrections, 2779 Plaza Drive, Jefferson City, Missouri, 65102. By mail and facsimile, 573-751-4099. Subject: Sunshine Law Request. This letter is a request for copies of public records under the Missouri Sunshine Law. Pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 610 of the Missouri Revised Statutes, we request that you provide copies of any and all records in the possession of the Department of Corrections, DOC, regardless of who produced them, regarding witnesses to executions. 1. All records indicating or identifying invitees of the Director of the Department of Corrections to witness scheduled executions in the past 12 months. 2. All records indicating responses of invitees of the Director of the Department of Corrections to witness scheduled executions in the past 12 months. 3. All records indicating requests by the public or the media to witness executions in the past 12 months. 4. All records indicating consideration of the requests by the public or the media to witness executions in the past 12 months. 5. All records indicating responses to requests by the public or the media to witness executions in the past 12 months. And 6. All records indicating actual witnesses to executions in the past 12 months. If any or part of this request is denied, please send a letter listing the specific exemptions upon which you rely for each denial, and provide the contact information for the official to whom we may appeal. Missouri Revised Statute, Section 610.023.4. This request must be acted upon as soon as possible, but in no event later than the end of the 3rd business day following the date the request is received. Missouri Revised Statute, Section 610.023.3. Because this records request is being submitted in the public interest and is likely to contribute significantly to public understanding of the operation or activities of your department, we ask that you waive any fees or charge a substantially reduced fee pursuant to Missouri Revised Statute, Section 610.026.1. However, should you decline to waive or reduce fees, proceed without approval if the cost does not exceed $50, and send an invoice with the records. If the cost will exceed $50, please inform us of the cost in advance. All correspondence regarding this request should be sent to Executive Director. Thank you for your attention to this matter. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact us. Document 2. In the Circuit Court of Cole County, State of Missouri, American Civil Liberties Union of Missouri, and others. Plaintiffs. Case number 14AC-CC00458. Missouri Department of Corrections. Defendant. Affidavit of Marla Bernard. I, Marla Bernard, being first duly sworn, states as follows. 1. Am over 18 years of age and competent to make this statement. 2. It is my understanding that plaintiffs in this case are requesting the release of Department of Corrections documents containing my personal information, including my home address, date of birth, social security number, place of employment, and criminal history. This information was provided by me so that I could witness the execution of Michael Taylor, who murdered my friend's daughter, Ann Harrison. 3. When I completed the application to witness the execution, I never expected that the information I provided could be made public by the ACLU or anyone else. 4. For this reason, I wish to assert any right to privacy that might exist with respect to the unredacted release of this information. 5. Specifically, I have the following concerns relating to the release of this information. I am a retired law enforcement officer who served with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department for 10 years. During the time that I served as a member of law enforcement, I have made arrests that resulted in the incarceration of many violent criminals. I have always been protective of my personal information in order to protect myself and my family from vengeful persons. I especially have concerns for my daughter and 2 grandchildren who reside with us and who might be placed at risk should this information be disseminated. I unequivocally do not want any of my personal information from Department of Corrections documents released to the ACLU. The release of this information would jeopardize my safety and the safety of my family. Further affiant saith not. The document was signed and notarized on July 21, 2015. In addition to the affidavits, there were letters prepared and sent, and an excerpt from one is as follows. July 24, 2015. I believe that, based on both constitutional and common law, and as defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, the right to privacy is the qualified legal right of a person to have reasonable privacy in not having his private affairs made known, or his likeness exhibited to the public, having regard to his habits, mode of living, and occupation. Disclosure of my personal information as requested by the ACLU clearly would violate these rights, as well as my rights to seclusion, privacy, and confidentiality. All of these were expectations when I provided this information to the Missouri Department of Corrections, and remain as such. As I understand it, the ACLU gathers this information on behalf of their client, Roderick Nunley, with whom this information will be shared. Nunley is a convicted murderer with a prior history of convictions for various crimes and has spent the last 26 years associating with criminals while incarcerated. There is no guarantee that Nunley will not provide my personal information to others who may assist him in potential retaliation against me, my family, personal identity, and/or personal property. My rights to safety, privacy, and protection against being another of Nunley's victims cannot be guaranteed. The ACLU was more interested in the rights of convicted violent offenders than in those of honest, hard-working taxpayers who disagree with their political posturing. Under the Sunshine Law, their bid for personal information cast a dark and looming shadow over the Harrisons. It forced them to testify in a courtroom once again, reliving all the horror that had plagued them for decades. It was cruel and unusual punishment being meted out by the very group who claimed to oppose such suffering. It was unnecessary and unbearable to observe. The attorney for the ACLU obviously failed to conduct the due diligence that one would expect a lawyer to perform, especially in a case that they started. When he began to question one of the witnesses, he began by asking, "Didn't you write a book about Ann Harrison?" It came as a surprise to him when the response was emphatical. "No." He looked at his notes, reading aloud a title, asking again, "Are you not the author?" Again, the response was unexpected. "Yes, but the book is not about Ann Harrison." The book he referenced was a true crime story, but it had nothing to do with the Ann Harrison case, nor was she mentioned anywhere in its text. The first rule of trial lawyers is never to ask a question you don't already know the answer to, and one can only surmise that he must have been absent from law school the day that maxim was covered in class. For whatever their intentions were, the ACLU's legal wrangling was simply grandstanding. No more, no less. They had searched the internet to find out personal information already, the book issue being a case in point. Before testifying, the witnesses had already conducted their own computer searches and could find the requisite information the ACLU claimed they needed. The belief that executions would not occur without witnesses was heartless and misguided. The ACLU accomplished nothing besides inconveniencing the witnesses and clogging the court with yet another frivolous case. There would still be representatives for Ann Harrison, who would bear witness to the execution of Roderick Nunley, notwithstanding. At the age of 50, Roderick Nunley would still die by lethal injection, and the witnesses would still attend the execution. Chapter 23. If revenge is a dish best served cold, then what can be said of retribution? After 25 years of sitting raw and unaddressed, would it be like a plate of meat left to rot? Was there a stench left lingering that caught your breath and left you gasping, struggling to stay alive like fragments of what Anne endured in her dying moments? Was this a dish of bitter herbs, reminiscent of the bitterness, poison, and death that Nunley and Taylor caused? If this was to be a judgment upon Roderick Nunley, would the retribution satiate the longing for justice for the victim? At 5 minutes before 7 p.m., representatives from the prison announced that the state had lifted the stay on Roderick Nunley's execution. As a result, witnesses could go back to their cars if necessary, as long as they went back through the metal detector. Food was made available, and they could eat. These were all significant, positive changes in the process for how victim families and witnesses were treated. When Roderick Nunley was finally executed, Bob and Janelle Harrison elected to release one final statement. For the last 26 years, Janelle and I have, on occasion, experienced a form of compassion for not only Roderick Nunley and Michael Taylor, but especially their families. No one involved deserved the pain, suffering, or anguish these two cowards have bestowed on this community. This feeling diminishes rapidly as our thoughts are uncontrollably diverted to the vision of Anne being dragged into the stolen car by her hair and stomped to the floorboard in an attempt to hide her from sight as they transported her to Nunley's home. Upon arrival at the home, she was made to crawl through the garage to an area where the true torture began, not only physical, but mental. They recounted in their confessions that while she was blindfolded, they laughed as she pleaded for her life, and how they stood over her and discussed that they had to kill her so she could not identify them. Anne was then lifted into the trunk of the stolen car as Nunley went to the kitchen to obtain the murder weapons. After attempting to slit her throat, only to find the kitchen knives were too dull, they elected to stab her repeatedly in the chest and back and shut the trunk lid, only to hear her sobbing and moaning in her final moments of life. Will the execution of Roderick Nunley and Michael Taylor bring a sense of closure for us and our younger daughters? We don't know. Will it put the heartbreak of reliving what they did to Anne during all the hearings, appeals, and seemingly endless stalling attempts? We certainly hope so. If this is the only form of closure we receive, then we will gladly take it. We want to express our deepest appreciation for all the support we have continuously received from our family, extended family, friends, Anne's classmates, the Raytown Girls Softball League, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Governor Nixon, the Attorney General's Office, the Department of Corrections, and especially to the officers and detectives of the KCPD, who worked tirelessly to bring Anne's killers to justice. Finally, we wish to thank the many members of the media and press, many of which have been at our side from the very morning Anne was taken. You have accepted the times when we were completely drained and just unable to speak to anyone. You allowed us the privacy we needed to work through the 26 years of grieving. Thank you all. Bob and Janelle Harrison. Unfortunately, the Kansas City Star elected to publish an article that selectively chose excerpts from the statement that gave the impression that the Harrisons were sympathetic to the Nunley and Taylor families, and that all had been forgiven. This report was not the case, and public sentiment was against the paper, with an outcry for a retraction and apology. This article was an awful thing to wake up to the morning after the execution. It was just another cruel and unnecessary blow to a couple deserving of sympathy and support. Radio talk show host Dana Wright was concerned enough to email the newspaper about its spin that changed the context of the Harrison statement. The first paragraph of the family statement makes it sound like the Harrison family is letting these guys off the hook, she wrote. In an attempt to mitigate the damage, the Star posted the letter in its entirety. Still, it was stuck in the editorial section of the newspaper's webpage, where a reader would have to look for it to read the complete document. So it was prefaced with the following, taken directly from that site. This is a place where the limitless space of the web makes it possible both to quote from it and to publish the full text. Shamefully, the full letter never appeared in any print edition of that newspaper. Anne's killers remained on death row for over a quarter of a century. In stark contrast, Anne's young life spanned only 5,000 days. Yet, in those days, she radiated a light that could not be dimmed. Anne was a shy, beautiful girl who made a positive impression on all who knew her. Anne was an honor student, a star athlete, a talented musician, an animal lover, and a loyal friend. Anne was a loving daughter, granddaughter, sister, niece, cousin, and an innocent child of God. On March 22, 1989, Anne was in her rightful place at the right time, simply waiting for a school bus. Anne was 65 feet from her own front door. There, but for the grace of God, stood any of us. For 26 years, Anne's family was painfully forced to relive the events of this case over and over as the result of frivolous appeals and demands from organizations that tout civil liberties but represent the victimizers and not the victims. Then, inexplicably, the scales of justice seemed to tip in favor of the killers, giving new meaning to the term criminal justice. The remarkable team of detectives, prosecutors, and victim advocates rode the waves of emotional highs and lows with the family, waiting for the case they worked so vigorously to come to its just conclusion. Nunley's execution was less justice and more retribution. It is a judgment upon the merciless who showed no mercy to Anne as she begged for her life. But, despite what the Kansas City Star had inferred, their convictions were not biased sentences. On the contrary, the punishments meted out were befitting the heinous crimes intentionally perpetrated by two grown men against an innocent child. No more, no less. The Star missed opportunities to do something powerful by informing citizens of how their tax dollars are being wasted repeatedly by defense attorneys clutching at baseless claims. Instead, the same empty arguments were filed countless times and denied by the courts. At some point, there needs to be an expectation that the courts will say, enough is enough, and cease permitting the re-victimization of the families who have already borne a cross for sins they did not commit. Newspapers like the Star could inform the public of what contemporary death row inmates actually experience. For example, in Missouri, they do not sit in solitary confinement for 23 hours each day. Instead, They live in the general population with access to televisions, computers, a gym, and, unfortunately, all the sex, drugs, and other illicit items they can manage to procure. Moreover, an inmate is only moved to solitary for 30 days before execution. Compelling images such as tragic solitary confinement with its wretched loneliness, an apologetic and recompensed Birdman of Alcatraz, or the sympathetic soul of the miraculous John Coffey, like the drink, except not spelled the same, spring from the vivid imaginations of creative scriptwriters. But unfortunately, it is simply the genre of Hollywood hype, and it would be a service if the public knew this. Informing its readers, telling them the truth about the prison system, exposing its dark and ugly underbelly. This is the stuff deserving of Pulitzer Prizes. But unfortunately, society seems to lack reporters with the level of ethics, both work and personal, required to undertake this and expose the truth. There is an epitaph from an old European monastery that reads, "Remember, friend, as you walk by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, you will surely be. Prepare thyself to follow me." Whether prepared or not, the remaining killer of Anne Marie Harrison had, after 26 years, finally followed her to his own death. As with his crime partner before him, the state of Missouri provided a quiet, secure, and painless end to his existence, a dignity not afforded to his victim. Despite being brutalized, tortured, and stabbed, she waged one final, valiant struggle against her merciless captors before she succumbed to her injuries. Anne Harrison did not go gently into that good night. Chapter 24. In August of 2015, Nunley's daughter submitted an affidavit to the Missouri Supreme Court on behalf of her father, stating that she would be willing to serve as her father's next friend in litigation. Next friend is a legal definition describing a person acting on behalf of an infant or other person under legal disability. Nunley clearly met the definition. During his execution, Nunley's breathing became heavy for a few seconds. Then, he briefly opened his mouth before becoming still. He was pronounced dead at 9:09 p.m., Central Daylight Time. Of 20 executions nationally in 2015, 10 had been in Texas, and Nunley's made the 6th death row inmate to be put to death in Missouri. It was never disclosed whether or not anyone from his family attended the execution or even claimed his body. The following is an excerpt from the statement issued by the Missouri Department of Corrections spokesman, Mike O'Connell. Roderick Nunley was executed by lethal injection at 8:58 p.m. on Tuesday, September 1, 2015, at the Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri, for the 1989 murder of Anne Harrison in Jackson County. He was pronounced dead at 9:09 p.m. His last meal was a steak, shrimp, chicken strips, salad, and a slice of cheesecake. After Nunley's execution, Missouri Department of Corrections Director George A. Lombardi read the following statement from Governor Jay Nixon. "Tonight, as we remember Anne Harrison, our thoughts and prayers are again with Bob and Janelle Harrison and the other members of Anne's family. The acts of violence that took this 15-year-old, who was full of life and promise, away from her loved ones, can never make sense to us. The 2 men who were found guilty of Anne's kidnapping, rape, and murder have now had their sentences carried out. But even as there is judicial closure tonight, we know that a Missouri family will always miss and grieve the young woman who has been gone for more than 26 years. We grieve with them. So, I ask that Missourians join me in keeping the family of Anne Harrison in their thoughts and prayers tonight." Roderick Nunley did not provide a final statement to anyone before his execution. Before Nunley's execution, Lisa Harrison posted a message on Facebook. I've spent the past couple months creating a mental draft of what I would want to say for Nunley's execution. I could write about the emotional roller coaster I experienced last year with Taylor's execution. I could write about closure and being unsure if that is something I will experience, and to what extent. I could thank the hundreds of people who have supported our family, much like I did last year. I could share the heartache of the past 26 years, or I could share how thankful I am to have had such strong parents and sister to show me how to cope and be a stronger person. I stayed up until 3 a.m. writing, draft after draft, trying to find words that can express exactly how I felt. I woke up at 6 this morning to my son climbing up on me, ready to watch TV and get the day started. He could sense something was up. I was my usual sleepy self, but I clearly wasn't in the mood for his overly excited demeanor. He would demand I get up off the couch and do puzzles. He would manage to find finger paint and insist he wanted to paint. He would pull a book for me to read, get dressed in his astronaut suit, and request that we watch Apollo 13. He would try to motivate me to clean the house and be productive somehow. He wasn't about to let me sleep all day as I wait for 6 o'clock tonight. I was his age when Anne died. I would spend more time looking at the same photos I have of us. I don't have many, but I have studied the same batch of photos for the past 26 years. Easter, 1988. Studio portraits, 1986 to 1988. Halloween, 1988. My birthday, 1989. Finally, a picture of me sitting at her gravesite. This one photograph sums up every feeling I have today. I don't think I could possibly put into words everything this photograph means to me. The hours we spent there, riding my bike, picking up flowers before the groundskeeper mowed. The innocence that I had. The months using my Mickey Mouse phone to try to call Anne. I was convinced E.T. had taken her, and I wanted to know when she would come home. I know I am not alone today, as we all wait for 6 o'clock. I went back and forth on if I wanted to share my thoughts today, or keep them to myself. Call me superstitious, but publicly sharing my emotions last year, for the first time in my life, ended with Taylor's execution taking place. It can't hurt to do it again. Chapter 25. Deborah Harrison learned to play the flute on the same instrument that Anne had used. It was the instrument left behind on the curb in front of the Harrison home when Anne was abducted, the one that lay by her side in her casket at her wake. It was painful at times for her parents to hear the music in their house. Hauntingly beautiful, yet tragically sad. Anne left a legacy of friendships that carry forward to this day. For decades, Janelle Harrison maintained a close friendship with David Chesser's mother, Elena. With significant health problems that mandated long-term care, Janelle served as Elena's driver, accompanying her to doctor's appointments, regularly visiting her care facility, helping her as any friend would until the day she died. Likewise, Anne's best friend, Juliet, remains close to Anne's parents, spending time with the Harrisons, staying with them at their cabin on the Lake of the Ozarks, sharing her own daughter with them as extended family. It is a fitting tribute to the type of people that the Harrison family comprises. The Harrisons continued to remain in the family home after Anne's death. They were fixtures in their community. Both daughters, Deborah and Lisa, attended Raytown schools. It was still home for the Harrisons, but with it came a price. There would always be the, "Aren't you Anne's mother?" or the look that came over someone's face when they were called, "My daughter went to school with yours," that seemed less often to be a recollection of the two younger girls and more of a veiled attempt to identify with Anne's parents. The uneasiness was palpable. The foot shuffling, the stammering, the I do not know what to say pauses in conversation. Friends could see it, so it had to be evident to the couple who wanted to keep Anne's memory alive, but maintain a balance because they still had a life with two beautiful, vibrant girls who were the center of their world. Sometimes people would ask about the entire family, but the memories of that tragic time still could take up all the oxygen in a room. It was unsettling, but it was the way life was. It was not normal. For the Harrisons, normal was nothing more than a dryer setting, and all the, "at least you have closure," and "she's in a better place," well-intentioned comments could not change the fact that they were paying a king's ransom for a crime they did not commit, a debt they did not owe. The demons which plagued the Harrisons' dreams were real, so waiting almost 3 decades for the execution of the sentence imposed and the termination of the lives of Anne's murderers seemed far too great a span of time. For 23 years, the Raytown Softball League, in which Anne played, held a fundraising tournament in her honor. So, when the Harrisons decided it was time to bring to closure a Raytown tradition after almost a quarter of a century, it was bittersweet. However, Anne loved to play softball. The annual event held in her honor afforded both Anne's close family and the community who rallied on behalf of her an opportunity to celebrate her life. Equally significant was the benefit it served the Lost Child Network, now the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, raising much-needed funds to support their mission. When the tournament program was disbanded, Craig Hill, one of the center's founders and a member of the Leawood Police Department, crafted the following letter. 2012. As Father's Day weekend approaches, I wanted to take a minute to thank everyone who has supported this great tournament and cause over the past 23 years. The Harrison family has asked that we discontinue the tournament, and we are honoring their wishes. I've had the honor and privilege to be the tournament director for this tournament the past 3 years, and I've met some very giving and caring people over those 3 years. This tournament always seemed to bring the best out of everyone involved. Players, coaches, umpires, parents, volunteers, etc. It was one of my favorite weekends of the year. Special thanks also to some of the young ladies who have volunteered their time to come help out. I'm sure I'll miss a few, so I apologize in advance. But thanks to Joella Vautier, Caitlin Shireman, Mackenzie Ryle, Brenna Hubbard, and Audrey White for all your help during the tournament. The purpose of this tournament was to remember Anne Harrison and also raise money, in Anne's name, for the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's my hope that the thousands and thousands of dollars donated as a result of this tournament helped keep our children safe. If one life was saved because of the programs this tournament helped fund, it was all worthwhile. Thanks again to all who helped support this tournament during my 3 years, and the countless others who made this tournament a success for the 20 years prior. We have an amazing softball community here in Kansas since the first time I met Bob and Janelle Harrison as president of the Lost Child Network. I have had the privilege of working with them since that tragic day they lost their daughter, Anne Marie, in 1989. Over the past 23 years, this wonderful couple played a major role in the growth of many prevention educational programs, as well as the construction of the NCMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Kansas City Branch Child Resource Center, named in honor of their daughter. As you all are aware, it did not stop there. Every single year, regardless of the weather, the remarkable friends from the Raytown Softball League, tournament organizers, coaches, umpires, players, and their families and friends brought together a Kansas City tradition with the Anne Marie Harrison Annual Girls Softball Tournament, benefiting the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. With close to $140,000 raised, the donations and funds generated from the Anne Marie Harrison tournament were used specifically for scheduling law enforcement trainings, prevention education presentations, and PhotoFax ID events, the sole focus being how to keep our children safe and assisting law enforcement agencies with needed training and materials. The support given by the softball community in the Kansas City and surrounding areas to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children the last 23 years deserves so much more than just a thank you. Because of Bob and Janelle Harrison, thousands of children were able to learn how to be safe. Now, as grown-ups, they can pass those messages on to their own kids. God bless Bob and Janelle Harrison. Craig Hill, Associate Director of Training and Outreach, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The executions of the killers of Anne Marie Harrison are now old news, but Anne's purpose-filled life left an enduring legacy of love and joy to all who knew her. Her closest friends have remained an active part of the lives of Bob and Janelle Harrison, a tribute to the love and generosity Anne's parents have shown in the face of unfathomable suffering. Fundraisers in her honor have provided over $140,000 to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Laws affording victims and their families to give impact statements have been enacted because of this case. The Harrisons have been active and impactful members of organizations such as Parents of Murdered Children and the Lost Child Network, serving as an inspiration to others who have had to deal with the violent death of a child through no fault of their own. In her memory, volunteers helped build a rose garden at the Cave Springs Interpretive Center, just down the road from the cemetery where Anne was laid to rest. A remembrance celebration was held there for the 25th anniversary of Anne's death. Friends from Raytown South High School, community members, and the family spoke. The tributes were heartfelt and genuine, reflecting the impact Anne made on the lives she touched. Chapter 26. No one can truly understand the everlasting impact such a violent crime has on those close to it. The chain of events that resulted from Michael Taylor's decision to grab Anne Harrison and force her into a stolen car that March morning was unforeseen and unavoidable. It was that perfect storm that brought forth a deluge of suffering and horror that rained down on everyone who came in contact with the case. Investigating a violent death of an innocent victim, no matter the age, sex, race, religion, or sexual orientation, takes a tremendous toll on the detectives, district officers, crime scene investigators, dispatchers, all the responders who in whatever manner touch the case. Detective Matthew Rogg worked on Anne's case from the night the police discovered her body until it was solved. He candidly shared his experience, an event that remains with him even today. It was early evening on March 23, 1989. He had been working days on Murder Squad, handling active cases where there was no known suspect. He would continue to follow up on leads until they caught a new one, which was KCPD homicide speak for another murder in the city. The Murder Squad kept 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. hours, but when called out to a new crime scene, they would respond 24/7. He was eating dinner with his family when his department-issued pager rang. Rogg was notified by the dispatcher to respond to an address on South Dittman Avenue without delay. Dispatch offered no further information. When he arrived at the scene, it was clear that this was more than just a call-out for a new murder case. There were police cars, marked and unmarked, arriving at the scene. Officers gathered around a blue Chevrolet Monte Carlo, parked in front of the address. The trunk was open, and as he approached the vehicle, he could see a body. His first thought was, "Oh my God, it must be Anne Harrison." As detectives worked the case, they would visit and revisit locations for any potential witnesses. All reports would be scrutinized, and additional focus would be placed on similar crimes in the area. Burglaries and auto thefts were of particular interest. At first, everything was speculation, with no witnesses, no weapon, no crime scene other than the trunk of the Monte Carlo. Frustration set in, but detectives had resolved that they would solve Anne's case sooner rather than later. "Looking into the trunk of that car on that night will haunt me until the day I die," he would say, some 30 years later. There were scores of people who volunteered to search for Anne's killers, but detectives were at a loss about where willing community members could begin to initiate a search. Officers had already gone to prominent locations, places close to the recovered stolen auto where the child's body was found, vacant areas and parks between the Harrisons' address and Dittman Avenue were logical choices, but from which direction? Scores of psychic predictions came in, most of which indicated that she was in the water or an abandoned building. Someone even brought in psychic dogs, which they claimed could find the crime scene. The potential for that was quickly dispelled by detectives, who humored the unsuccessful efforts of the handlers. It forced officers to squander precious time, as it proved to be a farce, but it still needed to be followed up. Edlund and his detectives would leave no stone unturned, nor permit potential criticism from observers by not acting on leads, no matter how foolish or unrealistic these proved to be. Rogg would later describe the personal impact of a case such as Anne Harrison's on those charged with investigating and solving the crime. "I had nightmares about it. Many a night, I would wake up in a cold sweat and sit straight up in bed, seeing her in the trunk. I would wonder what else could I have done to find her. Could I have looked just one more place? You feel a lot of misplaced guilt from a case like this." Rogg used his private vehicle and searched for hours, driving around South Zone, an area he was intimately familiar with from the years he worked there, using his knowledge, hoping to find some elusive clue. His response to Anne's case mirrored the comments offered by other detectives interviewed about the case, how they used their own time to run down leads, the sleepless nights replaying the day's events, grasping for one more clue that might bring closure to this case. The command staff did their best to not micromanage the investigative team, which was just as well, as Van Buskirk would never have allowed it anyway. Instead, he stood steadfast in his oversight of violent crime cases, commanding the respect of those he worked for and those who worked for him. Only those who walk the walk and talk the talk, day in and day out, honestly know what first responders and members of law enforcement go through. As President Theodore Roosevelt so eloquently stated, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." Chapter 27. Anne Marie Harrison's resting place is high on a spot in Mount Olivet Cemetery, near cedar trees whose roots are shallow and thrive where others cannot. Like the hardy cedars, Anne Marie Harrison's legacy thrives, not only in the hearts of those who loved her, but in the memories of the scores of law enforcement officers who searched for her, and in the history of a community that mourned for her. Native Americans, primarily the Cherokee, believe that cedar trees hold special powers to protect their loved ones from evil, and that the spirits of their dearly departed are held within their branches. Forever green, the cedars of Mount Olivet stand guard and protect Anne from the evil spirits that folklore claimed walk the earth. It was never shared with the witnesses what actually became of the bodies of the 2 men who murdered Anne Harrison. According to the staff who worked at the prison, it was anticipated that Nunley's body would not be taken by the family. Therefore, he would be buried by the state of Missouri, according to the prison's policies on deceased prisoners. The disposition of Taylor's body was unknown. And their sun does never shine, and their fields are bleak and bare, and their ways are filled with thorns. It is eternal winter there. Excerpt from the poem Holy Thursday by William Blake. Anne Marie Harrison's light still shines, and its warmth can be felt by all those whose lives she touched. May she rest in peace in the arms of angels. Afterward. When something as unexplainable as the abduction and murder of an innocent young girl happens, one unanswered question continues to surface. It begs the answer to why would a loving God allow this to happen? Arguing the existence of evil is in line with arguing about the existence of God. When bad things happen to good people, we question the latter, wondering how events like the murder of Anne Harrison could ever occur. Thomas Aquinas said, "Good can exist without evil, whereas evil cannot exist without good." Conversely, good can live independently, with nothing counter to sustain it. It allows us to take comfort in knowing that good continues to exist, even if it is often overshadowed by evil. Like water and air, evil is clear, colorless, formless, with no sense of taste or smell to warn us of its presence. Yet, as air and water are essential to life, evil brings with it actions that can cause the termination of life, the cessation of happiness, the end of much goodness. Its companions are deadly sins, broken commandments, violated laws. For myself, evil is like a thin piece of glass, offering no warning as we come upon it, stopping us in our tracks when we try to pass through it. When it shatters from the weight of our being, it cuts us with the vainest slivers, leaving us to bleed, whether literally, as in Anne's case, or figuratively, carving pain into our very souls. The learned will argue that God did not create evil, only good, and that evil is a consequence of free will. As one who has remained close to this case for a very long time, I like that interpretation. Contemplating Taylor and Nunley's actions, it is clear that they acted upon their own desires, relying upon their own free will and decision-making to take a life, hide the evidence, and when finally confronted with their crimes, to sign consent forms and confess voluntarily. Ironically, and in stark contrast to its intended goal, evil gives us a measure for goodness. The crimes committed against Anne Harrison made her light shine even brighter, drawing attention to the quiet virtue that she represented, the righteous indignation of a community, the integrity of law enforcement, and the ultimate realization of justice. Evil is a 4-letter word. Hope, love, heal are also 4-letter words. And, as we have seen by the life of Anne Marie Harrison, so too is the word good. The author. Where does anyone begin to thank all the individuals who stepped forward to search for Anne, search for her killers, and search for justice? Please know that there are no words to fully express the gratitude felt for all those who touched this case, directly or indirectly, whether through actions, words, or prayers. With sincerest appreciation, a special thanks to just a few of those who demonstrated the courage to stand in the arena. Chief Larry Joyner, retired. and the officers and employees of the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, current and retired, the Grandview Police Department, the Raytown Police Department, the Missouri Highway Patrol, Missouri Search and Rescue K-9 Unit, the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, the Jackson County Parks Department, Gary Van Buskirk, Pete Edlund, Troy Cole, Al DeVauconeer, Victor Zinn, Ed Glenn, William R. Martin, Bill Wilson, Joe Chapman, Reed Buente, Bill McGee, Matt Rogg, William Wilson, Gary Watland, Chris Jefferson, Rick Pilgrim, Herb Acklin, the Harrison family, Danny and Janelle Mang, Office of the Director, Missouri Department of Corrections, Office of Victim Services, Missouri Department of Corrections, Warden and Staff, Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center. Legal chronology for Michael Taylor. 1989. March 22. Michael Taylor and co-defendant Roderick Nunley kidnap, rape, and murder 15-year-old Ann Harrison. June 23. Michael Taylor confesses to killing Ann Harrison. July 28. The state charges Taylor by indictment with first-degree murder, forcible rape, kidnapping, and armed criminal action. 1991. February 8. Taylor pleads guilty to the charges. April 23. The penalty phase begins before the Circuit Court. May 3. The Jackson County Circuit Court sentences Taylor to death for the murder conviction, life for the rape conviction, 15 years for the kidnapping conviction, and life for the armed criminal action conviction. May 13. Taylor files a notice of appeal. August 9. Taylor files a Rule 24.035 motion for post-conviction relief in the Jackson County Circuit Court. 1992. July 1. The Circuit Court denies post-conviction relief. 1993. June 29. The Missouri Supreme Court remands for a new sentencing proceeding. 1994. May 2. The second penalty phase begins. June 17. The Jackson County Circuit Court sentences Taylor to death for the murder conviction, 15 years for the kidnapping conviction, life for the rape conviction, and 50 years for the armed criminal action conviction, the sentences to run consecutively. September 15. Taylor files a Rule 24.034 motion for post-conviction relief in the Jackson County Circuit Court. 1995. June 20. The Circuit Court denies post-conviction relief. 1996. August 2. The Missouri Supreme Court affirms Taylor's conviction and sentence and the denial of post-conviction relief. State v. Taylor. 1997. February 24. The United States Supreme Court denies certiorari review. Taylor v. Missouri. 1997. 1998. February 23. Taylor files a petition for writ of habeas corpus in the United States District Court of the Western District, Missouri. 2000. July 10. The District Court denies the petition for writ of habeas corpus in an unpublished order. 2003. August 18. The Court of Appeals affirms the denial of habeas corpus relief. Taylor v. Bowersox. 2004. March 22. The Supreme Court denies discretionary review. Taylor v. Bowersox. 2004. 2005. June 3. Taylor files civil suit challenging constitutionality of lethal injection as method of execution. 2006. January 31. The United States District Court for the Western District of Missouri finds lethal injection is constitutional. February 1. The Court of Appeals issues a stay of execution, pending review of District Court decision. The Supreme Court upholds the stay. Crawford v. Nixon, 2006. April 11. The Missouri Supreme Court issues writ to Jackson County Circuit Court, prohibiting it from reopening Rule 24.035 litigation. Nixon v. Dougherty, April 27. The Court of Appeals retains jurisdiction and remands to District Court for further hearing. Taylor v. Crawford, June 26. The District Court finds Missouri's method of execution unconstitutional and suggests changes to improve it. Taylor v. Crawford, 2006. August 9. The Court of Appeals relinquishes jurisdiction to District Court. Taylor v. Crawford. September 12. The District Court finds Missouri's written protocol unconstitutional. 2007. June 4. The Court of Appeals reverses District Court judgment and finds the written protocol constitutional. Taylor v. Crawford. 2008. May 20. The Missouri Supreme Court affirms the denial of post-conviction relief by the Jackson County Circuit Court. Taylor v. State. 2009. February 24. The Missouri Supreme Court rejects a claim by Taylor and others that written protocol did not conform to state law. Middleton v. Missouri Department of Corrections. November 10. The Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit concludes the protocol is applied constitutionally. Clemens v. Crawford, 2011. May 31. The Missouri Supreme Court rejects Taylor's challenge to judge sentencing. Taylor v. Steele. Legal chronology for Roderick Nunley. 1989. March 22. Michael Taylor and co-defendant Roderick Nunley kidnap, rape, and murder 15-year-old Ann Harrison. July 28. A grand jury in Jackson County indicts Nunley for first-degree murder, armed criminal action, kidnapping, and forcible rape. 1990. June 1. The Jackson County prosecutor files an information in lieu of indictment charging Nunley as a prior and persistent offender. September 27. Request for change of judge filed by Nunley, seeking to remove Judge Levitt in Division 13. October 2. Case moved to Division 14. October 10. State successfully moves for change of judge. The case is sent to Division 11. Judge Donald L. Mason. October 24. Judge Mason disqualifies himself, and the case is reassigned to Division 4. Judge Alvin Randall. 1991. January 28. Nunley pleads guilty to Judge Randall. May 31. Judge Randall sentences Nunley to death. August 12. Nunley files a pro se Rule 24.035 motion. September 3. Judge Randall recuses himself from the Rule 24.035 case, apparently upon learning the amended motion would accuse him of drinking before sentencing. October 9. Judge Randall recuses himself from the criminal and Rule 24.035 cases. October 15. Nunley files an amended Rule 24.035 motion alleging Judge Randall was drinking before sentencing. October 28. Judge Maurer recuses himself. Judge Mason, presiding judge, purports to recuse all judges in the 16th Judicial Circuit. November 22. The Missouri Supreme Court appoints Judge Robert H. Durker from the 22nd Judicial Circuit to handle the case. 1992. January 3. Hearing held on Rule 24.035 motion. March 23. Hearing held on Rule 24.035 motion. March 26. Hearing held on Rule 24.035 motion. July 1. Judge Durker denies Rule 24.035 motion. 1993. June 29. The Missouri Supreme Court remands the case for a new penalty phase. December 27. Nunley moves to withdraw guilty plea. 1994. January 26. Hearing on motion to withdraw guilty plea before Judge O'Malley. February 3. Judge O'Malley denies motion to withdraw guilty plea. May 10. Judge O'Malley sentences Nunley to death. July 13. Nunley files pro se Rule 24.035 motion. October 10. Nunley files amended motion for post-conviction relief. December 21. Hearing held on Rule 24.035 motion. 1995. February 14. Hearing held on Rule 24.035 motion. March 16. Judge O'Malley denies Rule 24.035 motion. 1996. March 28. The Missouri Supreme Court affirms in part, but remands for additional findings. November 20. Judge O'Malley denies the additional Rule 24.035 claims. 1997. January 21. The United States Supreme Court denies certiorari on the first Missouri Supreme Court decision. 1998. November 3. The Missouri Supreme Court affirms the denial of post-conviction relief. 1999. May 3. The United States Supreme Court denies certiorari on the second Missouri Supreme Court decision. 2000. April 28. A federal habeas petition is filed in the United States District Court for the Western District of Missouri. 2003. June 5. The United States District Court denies the petition for habeas corpus. June 16. Nunley files motion to alter or amend. December 4. The United States District Court denies the motion to alter or amend. 2005. January 14. The United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit affirms the denial of habeas corpus. October 3. The United States Supreme Court denies certiorari. 2010. August 19. The Missouri Supreme Court issues an execution warrant for Nunley and sets the execution date for October 20, 2010. September 30. The Missouri Supreme Court denies stay application. October 12. The Missouri Supreme Court denies motion to recall mandate and stay application. October 18. The United States District Court for the Western District of Missouri stays the execution based on the right to jury sentencing claim. 2011. May 31. The Missouri Supreme Court denies habeas corpus petition in a published decision on jury sentencing claim. 2013. April 18. The United States District Court for the Western District of Missouri denies a supplemental habeas corpus petition on the jury sentencing claim. 2014. March 12. The United States District Court for the Western District of Missouri denies motion to vacate the stay of execution. 2015. April 27. The United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit affirms the denial of the supplemental petition for habeas corpus. June 15. The United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit vacates the stay of execution. July 6. The Missouri Supreme Court issues an execution warrant for Nunley and sets the execution date for September 1, 2015. This concludes By the Side of the Road by Marla Bernard. Narrated by Claire Duncan. Copyright 2022 by Marla Bernard. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Wild Blue Press and was produced in the year 2022 by Tantor Media Incorporated, a division of Recorded Books, which holds the copyright thereto. Please visit Tantor.com for more information on our growing library of unabridged audiobooks.